Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. How are we doing today on this Monday? I hope we're all doing fairly well. I, for one, have had a day. It has been a Monday, but there are worse things in life, so we are going to relax, and we're going to play some Mahoutsukai no Yoru again. Nice and low impact. Good break for me as well, because after work I've been playing some Night Ring, which is very fun, and I highly recommend you try it out if you're a Souls fan, but it is much more of a high impact, high speed game. So I've got myself a nice ice cold Asahi beer here. I've got Witch on the Holy Night pulled up, and I've got you guys that I'm excited to be with. Speaking of, there we are. Now we're gaming together. Let's continue some Mahoutsukai no Yoru. So if you guys remember last time, we left off. Miss Aoko has trapped poor Sonoji in a hall of mirrors and is proceeding to try and murder him. And that's gone with some interesting results, including a comedic bit at the very start where he intuited through his sharp mountain-trained senses where Aoko was hiding, which was kind of funny. And then towards the end, right before where we are now, there was a mysterious third party that has come in to try and assumedly interfere, and through context clues, I'm going to intuit that it is probably the mage that is gunning for Aoko in her territory. So, let's continue where we left off. The moment Aoko's right arm began to glow, Soujurou made a beeline for the staircase in front of him. A strobing series of blue flashes lit the room behind him. The hunter calmly followed her prey, and the prey desperately ran for his life up the stairs. Look at that smug face. Absolute trouble there. In stark contrast to Soujurou's frenzied escape, Aoko walked briskly up the stairs. She elected not to run after her prey in order to maintain a set distance. As she lacked confidence in her accuracy, she would be most challenged if Soujurou bull-rushed her and went down fighting. But at a distance of 30 or so feet, he posed no threat, outside the 21-foot rule, which we talked about last time. By the time her prey drew near, she could fire 10 shots and hit with at least 4 of them. That's terrible marksmanship, by the way. That's aside, we can talk about that later if we want to. Their positioning just a moment ago hadn't been ideal. At this distance, in a space this open, there is a chance, however small, that it could turn into a fistfight if you flanked and charged her. Currently, Aoko's best weapon was the bullets from her right arm. If she was going to capitalize on that advantage, it was her best interest not to close the gap between them. If there was a good time to approach, it was only after her prey had become exhausted and had lost the will to continue. Put him down like the dog she thinks he is. Would she pierce his leg, shoot him in the back? Or, perhaps, would he just give up after losing himself in the labyrinth? The hunt would end when her target had sustained some sort of injury and became unable to run. On Soujurou's end, he could barely bite back on screaming as he bolted throughout the maze. Even running in a straight line had become difficult, much less searching for an exit. I wonder, I can't remember, but there's a difference between a puzzle and a maze. Not a puzzle, excuse me. A maze and a labyrinth. There we go, I figured out English. And a labyrinth, if I remember right, has one set entrance and exit, whereas a maze might have multiple. I think that's how it works. I can't remember if they explained that. Or maybe I've got it backed up, or mixed up rather. Let's find out together. The corridor stretched out far before him, or so the mirrors blocking the path had made it seem. Panicked, he made a turn to the right. Smack into another. Clutching his head in his right arm, Soujurou led with his left, groping through the air to see whether a wall was there or not. 2 more shots. He dove down the hall to the left, narrowly dodging the bullets targeting his life. Urged on by the sound of the approaching footsteps, he ran without thinking. That last one was close. A hair closer would have meant his life. He caught the odor of burnt hair from the back of his neck. He was very lucky. Or perhaps very unlucky. If he were actually lucky, he would not be in this situation in the first place. The second floor of the House of Mirrors was structured like a giant spiral. It wound left, starting from the outside wall. Eventually, it would lead to a dead end. The more he tried to escape, the more cornered he would become, as though he were trapped in a twisted guillotine. His stifled screams threatened to leak out as complaints. No matter what he did, he was going to be killed. All of his struggling merely served to prolong the inevitable. Yet he ran. No matter how many mirrored walls he rammed himself into, he ran. Even after crashing so hard that his forehead bled and he saw stars, he ran. Pain shot through him at every turn. The more frantically he ran, the more intensely he smashed into the invisible walls. His body began to understand this rule and begged him not to run anymore. His breath was already ragged after sprinting a couple hundred feet. No matter how he thought about it, this was not normal. This was way too crazy. It was all just a bad joke. If he turned around now, she would apologize to him for taking it too far. His mind had gone blank. As his body continued to slam into the mirrors again and again, his feet slowed as they began to believe that perhaps it really was all a joke. But then, another shot. He felt a chill, a touch of death upon his neck. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Soujurou knew this kind of terrible chill far too well. Ever since he had arrived in the city, he had come face to face with more than 1 or 2 near-death experiences. For someone who did not understand city life, his present predicament was not unlike when he experienced the traffic on the streets or the commuter rush on the station platform. He was far from an innocent babe unable to comprehend life or fear. Rather, everything he had ever known became irrelevant when he was flung into a completely different cultural sphere. Even society's promises of safety, something urbanites took for granted, were threats unknown. So, he was used to this already. Though if he were to be honest, he was dissatisfied with some things. Things oh dear. Let's try that again. Things superfluous to necessity. There we go. English is a funny language. This world was overflowing with valueless things. They were all dangerous in some way. Even the everyday necessities sold at the convenience store were, as far as he concerned, amazing tools. Civilization had raised the standard of living so high that it had numbed humanity's sense of danger. The city's constant pursuit of wealth and convenience was a poison to a country boy like Soujurou. And he did not have the capacity to accept these conveniences. That it was possible for such conveniences to easily and suddenly be misused and cause unintended accidents had always made him anxious. But why? He had to wonder why he was even here. As a quick aside, I love how much movement there is in this visual novel. It's really, really nice not to just have still frames, but have a lot of cinematography going on. A lot of stuff going on. It really lets it move and breathe in its own unique way. I quite like it. How ironic. It took the real threat of death to finally make him realize, like a divine revelation, what he'd failed to understand until now. He'd always had to expect the unexpected. Near-death experiences were far more common than one might think. To begin with, safety was something that came at a price. Being alive meant that the opposite was always lurking around the corner. It was just like a street light at night. When the sun rose, its illumination would naturally disappear. Another barrage of strange projectiles whizzed mercilessly by him. He recalled in the back of his mind the charred remains of someone at the hands of that blue flame 2 nights prior. Somehow, this situation reminded him of a horse being led by a dangling carrot. For now, he lifted his head and continued to run through the labyrinth. But for what purpose? Though he knew the pain in his chest was very real, he felt disconnected from it. The night sky visible through the skylight was a muddy ultramarine, no longer resembling the one he knew. And managed to calm himself. Soujurou began to laugh in despair, as though something rather precious had been broken. Everything had become meaningless anyway. Even so, his legs somehow made their way forward at the sight of her reflection in the mirror. Like a game of cat and mouse, Soujurou fled through the labyrinth of mirrors. Then, after 4 minutes, that strangely unreal tension ended. Ooh, close. The 9th shot of blue light hit inches away from him. It exploded the moment it made impact, launching Soujurou into the opposite wall. Of all the fire he had taken thus far, this shot indisputably brought him the closest to death. Groaning, he collapsed to the floor. His back was on fire with pain. He was not bleeding, and he was lucky he could still even scream. Yet, his body refused to move. Physically and mentally, he still had something to spare. The pain was not so bad that he couldn't get back up. It was just that there was a skylight above him, and he could glimpse the dark of the night sky beyond. The feeling that overcame him was a raw, selfish bout of grief. Oh, it was just so cruel. To have to stare at that for the remainder of whatever short life he had left. Soujurou's ragged breath slowed. For all his intents and purposes, he had given up. He had given up fleeing from the pursuing footsteps, and perhaps even the root of all his problems. Soujurou Shizuki felt things that, in any other circumstance, he would never feel. Incidentally, without exaggeration or embellishment, this was the only mistake he had ever made in his entire life. Staring vacantly into the night sky above, Soujurou listened as the footsteps drew nearer.
Give up?
It was the closest her voice had ever been to him. Perhaps feeling that he really had given up, she approached his collapsed form. In the dark, mirror-lined corridor, he could not make out her expression. Without a word, Soujurou raised his eyes to meet his murderer.
返事がないならそれでいいけど。調子狂うわ。普通どうして殺そうとするのかぐらい聞くものじゃない？
Aoko spoke from within the shadows. His eyes widened in bewilderment. Now that she had mentioned it, he realized it would have been the most obvious question to ask. He had more or less picked up on the fact that he was being killed for learning some secret, but it was human nature to want to know more. A simple affirmation. His face was a mixture of resignation and a forlorn longing. He thought for a moment before. He responded in a mature, subdued voice. His response was clear, rather gallantly so.
そう。じゃ、殺すけど。死ぬの怖くないの？
怖いに決まってる。何より痛そうだ。
His face turned wry as he objected, to which Aoko frowned. Nonchalantly as he could be, he was honest about his feelings.
そりゃ怖いでしょう。私だって怖いと思うし。でも悪いわね。我慢して。人でなしと罵ってくれて結構よ。今の私は本当にその通りだから。そういった意味じゃあんたと同じ。普通の道徳がないのよ。だから必要なら人も殺せる。
Sojurou's finger twitched in response to her indifferent tone, as if to say that, despite having given up on just about everything, his body could not let those words slide.
人殺しなんて良くないぞ。
分かってるって言ってるでしょ。
Aoko raised her right hand. The light from the crest illuminated her face. It goes without saying that her expression was unchanged. She was not crying, nor was she smiling. She was a young woman who had excised her feelings. Deal with it was another thing Soujurou could not let slide. Soujurou could read on Aoko's face that she was not herself. She was in pain, and to a degree he had never seen in her.
すまない。ちょっといいかな。
何？ここまで悲壮感を盛り上げておいて、やっ。
He unconsciously smiled at Aoko's ruthless counter and breathed a sigh of relief. He had misread the pain he saw in her face. This was the same Aoko. Soujurou laughed out loud in genuine joy, a laugh that most other people would have taken as an insult.
遺言でも聞いてあげようと思った私が甘かった。っていうか、今の小バカにした笑いがあんたの遺言ってことで OK？
いや、そうじゃなくて、あそこにいる人は青崎の友人なのか。
Out of nowhere, Soujurou pointed behind Aoko.
はあ？
Aoko thought it must have been that old, overused distraction technique. If this had been a Japanese comedy act, this would be the part where she had given him a whack with a paper fan. But after giving it a second thought, she realized Soujurou didn't have the capacity for understanding old or even new tricks.
あんた何言って。
Perhaps his honest disposition had been to his benefit. Without thinking, Aoko gave in to her curiosity and turned her gaze toward the direction in which his finger was pointed. And there, a new challenger approaches. Something that should not have been there in the maze. Something with a creaking wooden smile. It was the ominous, creepy, uncanny figure of a girl. White woman jump scare.
人形？
An unusual figure with 2 arms and 2 legs stood silently in the darkness. If only for a moment, its beauty, which was even apparent from afar, dulled the insanity of the current situation. Go gadget arms. Extend, extend, extend. The utterly unknown threat made Aoko freeze on the spot. Avoiding it didn't even occur to her. Humans possess intelligence and knowledge, but when confronted with the unknown, they fail to process what to do and get smacked the fuck up. A shriek escaped Aoko's mouth. The magical attack crossed the 30-foot gap in an instant. The arm of the girl who had appeared at the rear of the corridor was slender and quick. It extended to a near impossible length, striking Aoko from behind. Aoko crashed into the wall as she fought back in anguished whimper. The attacker retracted her arm.
Aozaki!
Soujurou sprang to his feet. He darted to her side and used all the strength he could muster to get her to her feet. He could not believe how light she was. In Soujurou's mind, Aoko was an extraordinary individual. He'd expected that if he were to ever touch her, it would be apparent she was far stronger than he. But in reality, she felt about as heavy as you would expect a 100-pound girl to feel. Meanwhile, that thing continued to reel in its arm, as if it were some sort of mechanism. Having extended more than 30 feet from the elbow joint, it clanked as it returned to its previous shape and size. Danger makes for strange bedfellows, that's for sure. Aoko tore her hand away from Soujurou's. Suddenly, she felt her knees buckle from under her, but Soujurou caught her before she could hit the ground and helped her to her feet. He looked back at the eerie shadow 30 feet away as it finished retracting its arm. Aoko grabbed her lower back as she answered. A searing pain shot through her. Aoko tried to steady her breathing as she assessed the damage done to her back. The pain was quick to fade, and her breathing returned to normal. For the time being, her motor functions were no longer hindered, which meant the real damage was elsewhere. Blue light glowed across the room. The magical energy generated by her breathing was accumulated in her right arm. If magical energy was the fuel, the formula was the igniter. For Aoko, this was little more than a reenactment of 2 evenings ago. Next time the puppet extended its arm, Aoko would fire a magic bullet as fast as she could. A battle at approximately 30 feet. As long as Aoko could secure a 2-second window, she could create a counterattack to end their duel. It made its move. With its head tilted down, there was no expression to be seen, and in the darkness, its apparent age was impossible to make out. To the 2 humans, the puppet was not dissimilar to a faceless ghost. Ooh, this faceless ghost, this puppet, looks eerily familiar. Its left arm slowly came up with a grinding sound. Its movements were dull, as if its joints were rusty. The right arm, which had been extended earlier, hung at its side. Though the puppet's mouth was hidden by its long locks, the sense was that it was smiling. There it goes. She threw herself into Soujurou and extended her hand. Its arm extended at that very moment. The timing was impeccable. In a single second, Aoko's snap bullet scored a direct hit on the puppet's arm, throwing off its trajectory and sending it crashing into the puppet's body with a violent explosion. Or at least, that is what would have happened had the magic formula been invoked. Narrow dodge. She barely avoided being struck once again. When her magecraft failed her, intuition took over, and she just managed to get away. She clenched her teeth in frustration, her thoughts racing a mile a minute. Fight or flight? It only had one arm left, which would take time to retract. This was the best shot Aoko had at defeating it. If she could evade the right arm just for a fraction, she could get close enough to Vivo in somno, solitarie potresco in infernis, hic dies meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies te obeam. In slumber I live, in dirt I rot alone. Today is the day I died and was born. I come to you. A crackle echoed through the corridor. The poetic murmurs contained enough magical energy for a mage to perceive. The verse itself was Latin, but it contained hints of the language of curses, Gandhar. Originally, they were words meant to curse a hated adversary. However,
Mea animae murderous, otem eftura negata sunt. Manes sunt, animam definire unbeknownst. Theodi et am, conveniamus insomnio ipsum.
mea anima immortalis, autem mea futura necata sunt, manes sunt, animam definire ambiguum est, te odi et te amo, conveniamus in somnio ipso. My life is immortal, though my future was destroyed. I am a ghost, the definition of life is ethereal. I hate you, I love you, let us meet in a dream. The puppet was directing the words at itself. Curses beget curses. The victim calls down a curse on the assailant, creating a vicious cycle of negativity. The incantation was meant to do just that. However, this was ultimately a one-puppet show. An unprecedented source of power akin to an auto-intoxication. As unbelievable as it seemed, the cycle of curses had been turned into a perpetual motion device.
何それレベル高すぎじゃない
Aoko abandoned the idea of digging her heels in. It was time to flee with all due haste. Time to break out that Joestar family technique.
何してんのあんたも来る
She grabbed Sojurou's hand and ran as fast as she could, deeper into the realm of mirrors. The crackling voice continued its murmuring behind them.
Proximi mich negligentes ferunt, omnes nos peccantes fuis, et omnes nos edem fuis, omnes nos peccatores suns. Venit domum meum, lut sine somnium, et pulvere simile quotidianum, cor prego.
Proximi mihi negligentes fuerunt, omnes nos peccantes fuimus, et omnes nos aedum fuimus, omnes nos peccatores sumus. Venite domum meam, luto simile somnium, et pulvere similem contiadum cor privo. My neighbors neglected me. Oh my goodness. I get the Latin, but I mess up the English. How's that work? My neighbors neglected me. Not an innocent among us. We were all sinners. We are all sinners. Welcome to my house. May we die a muddy death. From dust to dust, gouge out my heart. Te judico. Death be upon you. Aoko fought against the pain in her back as she ran through the mirrored corridor. She dragged Soujurou by the hand.
青崎、傷は
別に背骨がしびれてる程度よ内臓は平気だし出血もないみたい
She cursed inwardly at how much of a mess she felt, though. Unlike Soujurou, Aoko did not run into any transparent walls. Thanks not to superior sight, but rather preparation. She'd hammered the layout of the building into her memory, which is very impressive. I could not begin to imagine the pain of trying to mentally map out a hall of mirrors and then be able to use it in practice.
そりゃ自分の体だもの身体管理は基礎中の基礎よ
Aoko's matter-of-fact answer contrasted with Soujurou's nervous questioning. The corridor grew shorter with each and every left turn. At first, they were able to advance in a straight line for about 100 feet at a time. But by now, they were forced to turn a corner every 50 feet or so.
あいつはあの夜の
多分ね同じタイプだと思う貴重なオートマタを惜しげもなく使い捨てるなんてよっぽどお金持ちなんだろうけど
If I was a mage, or I was in a setting, a fictional setting, where I had a magical ability of some sort, some supernatural ability to my name. I was actually talking about this with a friend of mine recently who's watching Hunter x Hunter for the first time. I would probably have something like puppeteering or some kind of summoning or necromancy or something like that to bring up other force multipliers, because I am small and taste good with ketchup. As my name implies, I am small in real life, even though I do work out and I've gotten a little bit muscled. And that's kind of where my mind goes. It's kind of where my natural inclination is. I'm not the fastest, I'm not the strongest, but if I could leverage something else, be a little bit creative, that might work as well. Although on that point as well, if you would allow me to indulge a little bit of a nerdiness, if I was in Hunter x Hunter, I would be a specialist, and my ability, to make it very, very brief and simple, would be to treat any space around me within a certain perimeter, thanks to a binding vow, as non-Euclidean, which I think would be a very, very fun ability, which is as useful as you imagine it to be. And that's kind of what I would be leveraging there. Or some kind of puppet mastering ability. But enough of that. Let's get back to the story. Soujurou furrowed his brows. He was grateful that she was answering his questions, but baffled by the strange words she was using.
Aozaki, stop. もう随分走ったぞ。あいつは曲がり角一つ分向こうだ。少し休もう。
His words suggested that he was still concerned about her injuries. Aoko shook her head in irritation.
あの距離を狙ってくる相手に通路一つ分のリードは無意味よ。せめて二つ分に行くまで走るの。
Soujurou nodded. Sage advice. With that matter settled, he asked.
なんで俺を連れて行ってるんだ?
Awkward moment to bring that up, but hey, nothing like the present. Answering curtly, Aoko glared at her naive prey. It is a good point, though. The automaton has no reason to kill him. At least that we know of. The two of them headed for the next corner. Their legs began to slow as they rounded one more. Aoko rubbed her back as she tried to catch her breath. Though Aoko had insisted that she was fine, it appeared to have been bravado. Even the usually clueless Soujurou felt the desperation they were in. He stood behind Aoko with his arms folded. While they had a moment, he tried to make sense of everything. First, Aoko had nearly killed him. Though he was saved at the last possible second, it was by the strange, stretchy woman Aoko had burned to ashes 2 nights prior. He could barely make it out that night, but he considered it a her because it looked female. Fair enough. The woman's attack wounded Aoko's back and forced her to flee. Aoko had taken Soujurou with her, claiming that the reason she did so was to prevent her prey from escaping. In other words,
青崎はまだ諦めてないんだな。
very astute, brother. Thank you.
当たり前よ。あんなやつ、仮に2体と半分始末しても、あんた用の余力は残せるわ。
Her tone was sharp, but even Soujurou could see that she was struggling to stay confident. The damage to her body was too much to afford her any optimism. Still, the fury in her eyes refused to accept her circumstances.
中がところどころショートしてる。あの右腕は回路を混戦させるジャミングってわけね。
Though the proper response would have been for her to tremble in fear, she did nothing but shake her fists in anger. She's a fighter, I'll give her that. The disruption of formulae was only supposed to work on absolute beginners. If it had been her roommate, the arm would have been repelled the instant it hit her, and the attacker's circuits burned out, rather than her own. Attempting to establish a link to the magic circuits of another mage was like presenting your heart on a silver platter. It would be of no use in a battle against a superior mage. And yet, her adversary had been designed to do just that. Statement piece, perhaps. Coupled with the attacks on areas of Misaki under Aoko's jurisdiction these last few weeks, It was a clear statement from the enemy, who had revealed itself as a fellow mage 2 days ago. In other words, the puppet saw Aoko as no threat at all.
敵ながら正確な判断だこと。
While she was still angry, the whirlwind of emotions within her started to fade. Her face was that of a hunter far beyond her years. Nice boots, by the way.
なんか俺の時より真剣だな。
まあね、あんたの時は遊びが入ってたし。
Soujurou was not sure whether to be happy or sad about that.
わからないことだらけで何を聞いていいかわからないんだけど、一つだけいいか。
Aoko didn't respond. Her eyes were focused on the darkness before them. The silence was heavy.
あいつも殺すのか。
A stillness fell over them. It was as if the gloom was pulling them in. No response. Their breathing was the only sound echoing in the dim corridor. There stood Soujurou, forcing her to confront her sins, and the magician girl who continued to ignore him. They spent a few seconds, seemingly frozen in time.
それがあなたのキーワードみたいね。
Aoko whispered in a lifeless tone. Her sigh tinged with both resignation and contempt.
キ何？
独り言よ、忘れて。それと言っとくけど、
But just
あ
so
いつ
you
は人
know,
間じゃないわ。
that thing following us isn't human. Thank you very much, Aoko.
信じられないだろうけど、自分の意志で動く人形なの。この前の、今のやつもね。
Soujurou nodded as he processed the information. Not only did he not doubt her story, but he seems to have accepted it at face value.
なんか落ち着いてるわね、あなた。
まさかもう何が何だかわからないからあまり考えないことにしてるだけだ。
Soujurou was so real for that.
人形に関しては別にどうということはない。
もしかして他でも自動人形を見たことあるとか？
都会の人形ってああいうものじゃないのか？
She barely stopped herself from falling to her knees. Of course. How could she have forgotten? She was dealing with a bona fide, natural-born moron. As a student who transferred from the isolation of the mountains like an endangered species, his utter lack of common sense rendered anything miraculous as mundane and comedic. If automobiles were moving hunks of metal, then moving puppets were nothing to write home about. Wait, that meant... to him, the incident from the other night hadn't been extraordinary at all. He might have even assumed it was an everyday occurrence in this city.
参った。いっぺん頭の中覗いてみたいっていうか、ほんと、ここまで来ると感心するわ。調子が狂うのも当然だった。普通は私に襲われた時点でもっと違う反応をするはずなのに。化け物とか、お化けとかさ。でもあなたにとっては、そういうこともあるで済まされてたわけなんだ。なんかバカみたいね、私。
Her strained face returned to normal for a moment. It hit her. There had been another way to handle this without anyone getting hurt. But the damage had already been done. There were no do-overs in life, nor should there be. Her own mistaken assumptions had set this situation spiraling out of control. But now that Soujurou was involved, she had to make sure that her secret was safe with him. Even if there had been another, better option, that ship had sailed. Human relationships were ultimately driven by mutual misunderstandings. A bit cynical, but not entirely incorrect. They were like tapestries, woven from mismatched intentions. Break time was over. There stood Aoko Aozaki and Soujurou Shizuki. Their first ever idle conversation had come to an end. Not that they had any choice in the matter. It was the jarring murmuring from around the corner that cut it short.
Nemo meus meminit, veduret extinctus est. Initio eraberabus dum redimus dolores sunt. Nemo adiuvat.
Nemo meum funus meminit, qui doluit extinctus est, initio eraveramus dum vivimus dolores sunt, nemo adiavont. Nobody remembers my funeral. My mourners have long since perished. We were born wrong. Life is suffering. Somebody save me. More curses. The enemy was just around the corner, visible in the mirrors parallel to it.
悠長に話してる場合じゃないわね。
Which means it can see you as well. Oh, a different approach. In contrast to Aoko's elegant blues, its lights were malicious red.
ガンダ打ち
Gandar shots. Which are like, I don't know if they'll explain it, but Gandar shots are curses, but they fire them like bullets, sort of like Aoko's shots as well. There was a momentary flash of light before she even extended her arm. But the instant she saw the enemy, her dormant feelings erupted once more.
さっきから邪魔なのよ
She channeled all of her pent-up anger and shunted it into her right arm. The fog that filled the corridor was no magical weaving, but rather a barrier of raw energy. It was equivalent to setting ablaze 3 buckets of gasoline to create a wall of fire, and the hope that it would stop an arrow in flight. If the puppet had attacked with its arm, it could have pierced such a wall easily. But because it had loosed curses with no definite form, the wall of energy had repelled the attack. While it was a huge waste of magical energy, it was the only means Aoko had to protect herself at the very moment. Unfortunately, its protection was reserved for Aoko alone. Soujurou held his hand to his mouth. While the curse had been weakened to the point where Aoko could no longer feel it, it had plenty of effect on Soujurou, who was not a mage. As if it understood this fact, the puppet turned its gaze from Aoko to the unanticipated human behind her.
こいつは関係ないでしょ
Enraged, she swung her arm forward once again. The blue light formed a wall to block the Gandar for a scant few seconds. It was enough of an opening to exploit. Just as Aoko was forming the wall, the puppet pointed its right arm at her face and...
関係あるみたいだから逃げるぞ
Joestar secret family technique time. Before the rocket of death could be fired, Soujurou scooped her up into his arms. So gallant. How he mustered the strength to do so was a mystery, but he turned his back on the puppet and took off running. He was a nimble sprinter, resembling a deer leaping across obstacles. Soujurou rounded 2 more corners, ignored whatever complaints Aoko was making, and eventually stopped in the middle of the 2nd floor. He set her down.
よしここまで来れば少しは休めるな
Soujurou's shoulders heaved as he caught his breath. As light as she was, running while carrying someone else would make anyone winded. She looked up at him in incomprehension.
こんな体力あったのになんで
It made no sense to her. If he had the stamina to pick her up and run, surely he could have stood up and escaped when he had downed earlier.
あああの時は諦めてたから
His words were unfiltered as ever. Though right then, fighting for their lives, he lacked some of his usual absent-mindedness.
諦めてたって
さあ忘れたそんなことは
Though he may have turned away because he regretted saying it aloud, his words spoke volumes. For some reason, it pained Aoko to see him like that.
それより青崎唐突に気分が悪いんだがあの赤い光もその
ええ魔術の類よ ガンド打ちって言ってね、北欧の呪詛の一つ。魔術回路のある私には効かないけど、
なんだ、青崎には効かないのか。じゃあ危ないのはあの腕だけだな。
Aoko had no idea why he was relieved, but she gritted her teeth and fought down the urge to snap at him. There was no use in yelling at a time like this. Above all, she felt that it would have been petty in the extreme to voice her annoyance right now. Even she has standards.
注意するのは伸ばしてくる腕だけ。大した相手じゃないわ、やっぱり。
This time, it was not false bravado. Such an enemy would normally be a breeze for Aoko Aozaki, but her shameful negligence had led to the disruption of her magic circuits, making her even less formidable than her enemy. At this point, Aoko had no way of attacking. The only option left to her was to wait for it to expend all of its magical energy, but its perpetual curse mechanism made that a non-starter. This game of tag would not end until one of them was dead. She realized that she was in the same position she had cornered Soujurou in earlier. Oh, the irony. She glanced at her right arm. She cannot imagine how she had gotten into such a mess with her magical energy at more than half of its capacity. This had to be karma for having enjoyed toying with Soujurou earlier.
呆れた。いるところにはいるものね、アミスマ。
There is, and he's laughing. She grumbled under her breath as she shifted her focus. She had the fuel for the fire, but not the igniter. And that killing machine would chase her until the end of time if need be. What she should do next was blindingly clear. She had to get back to normal.
青崎、
ごめん、考え事してた。確か。よし、合ってる。しずきくん、そこに横道あるのわかる？
Aoko pointed, but he could see nothing but the walls of the corridor. For one thing, the floor had nothing but left turns, and Aoko was pointing to the right.
2階は中心まで行くと1階に降りる階段があるんだけど、それは私が壊したから使えないの。け
How
ど
thorough.
ここの作りも意地が悪くてね。よく見れば右に曲がる通路もあるのよ。あとは注意して探せば1階の階段までショートカットできる。悪いけど一人で行って。
Aoko turned her back to Soujurou and started walking in the opposite direction of the escape route, and down the long corridor towards the puppet in pursuit.
あいつは無差別だからここで壊さないといけない。魔術師は魔術師同士で争うのはいいんだけど、緑、あいつの目的は私のわけだし、結果がどうあれすっきりするでしょ。
If Aoko won, the puppet would be destroyed. If Aoko lost, its objective would be complete, and it would shut down. Either way, them going their separate ways would mean Soujurou survived, at least for the day. This is what Aoko meant. Though she explained it as if the events were happening to two totally different people.
運が良ければ入り口までたどり着けるわ。それじゃあまた明日ね。
Even Soujurou could tell she was just trying to act tough, but she'd already disappeared around the corner by the time he thought to stop her. Sate. Mentally, Aoko bemoaned the disaster she was in. The quality of this puppet was on a completely different level compared to the one from the park 2 days ago. An auto-incanting perpetual motion machine was a rarity in and of itself. But this puppet was also equipped for battle, with its extending arms and gauntlet-projecting crystalline eyes. It was a first-class product that, if put on the market, would sell for hundreds of millions of yen. Although, that was only when factoring in its value as an antique. For the purposes of combat, it would have made more sense to mobilize a significantly less expensive familiar. To use such a precious commodity as a tool for murder marked this puppet's master as a completely different breed of crazy from the enemies she had faced up until now. We love a little bit of crazy around here.
Solitare putoresque inferis. Ictius mers orbitis dies, et mers nativus dies. Peobeam.
Vivro in somno, solitarie putresco in inferis, hic Dei dies meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies te obeam.
来たわね。
Here it comes. That's super intimidating. I ain't gonna lie, dude. If I saw that in the middle of the night, I'd be very upset. A sound of crackling music box filled the air. The automata, animated by its own curses, approached. The corridor measured approximately 30 feet in length. Aoko lay in wait around a corner further down the hall, anticipating the puppet's appearance. This was not to buy Soujurou time to escape. Far from it. Aoko had concluded that she couldn't make a break for it under the current circumstance. Even if she did try to escape, and, by some miracle, made it out of the House of Mirrors, that was as far as she would go. Outside, with no cover, Aoko would quickly be overtaken and skewered from behind. As long as her magecraft was disabled, escape was impossible. Instead, she chose to force the enemy back. No way out, just through. Her situation was not the most favorable, but neither was the puppet's. Though this narrow hallway gave Aoko no place to run, it in turn prevented the puppet from reaching full speed. That was the weak point of this machine. Automata of its era had a tendency to struggle with minute changes in speed. Like old cars. She flowed energy into her shorted circuits. Her blood flow and magical energy supply were unstable. I imagine that's gotta feel like your blood getting lit on fire, or maybe spikes going through all your veins. It seems very unpleasant. It would be difficult to construct a formula in this state. All she could do was harden her right arm by imbuing it with as much energy as she could. Doing so turned her arm into an improvised weapon like a hammer or a bat. Assuming she could manage to get it into close combat range, this was the best she could do. All she needed now was a plan of attack. The question wasn't what weapon to use, but how to use the weapon she had. The eternal question. The simplest way would be to use the mirror's reflections to hide and then rush the puppet from its blind spot, except for one major problem. It did not have a sense of sight in the first place. The puppet's view of the world around it did not stem from visual feedback, but from mapping the topography of its surroundings. In theory, it was the same as a bat's echolocation. The environment could be measured based on the emission and return of high-frequency sound waves. It's got blind sight. Those chants served as sensor pulses. As far as the puppet was concerned, the mirrors were no better than the transparent panes, making even the thought of an ambush laughable.
近づけば近づくほどよりリアルに察知される。本当は遠距離からの狙撃が最適なんだけど、ガンドを撃ってくるならフィンの一撃ぐらい隠してるわよね。
Gondar was a Scandinavian in origin, and considering its simplicity, highly versatile. It was most effective at impairing a target's health by pointing a finger. You might remember this if you're familiar with the Nasuverse, and Fate specifically being something that Ren Tosaka has used. As a single-action magecraft, it was limited to only causing illness, but there's a secret technique said to be the greatest mastery of the Gondar shot, the Fin shot. It could do no more than cause simple illness. Or it could do more than cause simple illness. There we go, English. It was a deadly curse that could stop the heart. A little bit of a step up. The wound on her back set her nerves on fire. An unarmed girl and a deadly automaton. It was clear that she was the one destined for death. She considered her slim chances of survival when... Uh-oh. A vision sent chills down her spine. Quietly, using everything she could to clamp down on the feeling, Aoko faced her all too familiar illusion. She clenched her teeth to keep them from making a deafening chatter. But there, the sensation of fingers crawling up her neck. Behind her, the specter stared and laughed. This alone made Aoko want to bolt. On top of it all, when Aoko tried to mentally simulate the coming fight, she estimated a 2 in 10 chance of dying in the first 5 seconds. It's not good odds. 20%? At times, her predictions were harsher than reality. If Aoko fought the puppet 10 times, she would die twice. She could not stop herself from visualizing her own corpse. She imagined herself collapsing, crumpling under the puppet's curse. Her eyeballs swollen like a blowfish, blood and other fluids oozing from every bodily orifice. 1 in 5, 1 in 5, 1 in 5. A 1 in 10 chance of death was bad enough, but 1 in 5 drove her crazy. I'll go first down her heart rate as it tried to escape from her mouth. Taking in a deep breath, she peered at her own reflection. She thought back to that white night, half a year ago. This, she decided, this is nothing compared to that. 6 months ago, at the Kuonji estate, the Hound of White Roses, the Wander Snatch that appeared from within the thick fog, had killed Aoko 100 times out of 10.
Mea anima immortalis, autem mea futura negata sunt. Manes sum, animam definira ambiguum est.
Mea anima immortalis, autum mea futura negata sunt, manes sum, animam definere ambiguum est. A dark curse shadowed Aoko's daydream. It was only 30 feet away. The puppet rounded the corner. Either side stood in the shadows, their forms distinct. Wild West style, baby. Time for a shootout. The puppet gave no warning. Without preamble, it swiftly fired a Gondar barrage. Just as Aoko planned, the curses fizzled out as they hit her mist-like barrier of magical energy. Their protection would only last a few seconds, giving her just enough time to... Its stretchable spear sprang towards Aoko's face.
Bingo!
Jackpot. The lethal weapon grazed her cheek. All her experience analyzing puppet attack patterns gave her the wherewithal to evade the attack by a hair's breadth. She's got a lot of hair, so that's fortunate. It was one thing if a puppeteer were pulling the strings, but automatous dolls had their limitations. Aoko had bet everything on this killing machine following a predefined template. The puppet would use a given attack for a given range, and she could adjust her tactics to that. Shansu. Before its arm had a chance to fully retract, she charged the puppet. It was a risky gamble. Risky. R's and W's. But her overall chances were slim to begin with. The scales tipped in her favor. If her predictions were correct, there were 2 ways she would die. One was from a fin shot fired at that range. And the other? The other was if the puppet's attack pattern was beyond her ability to foresee. Instantaneous mass transfer. Nothing personnel, kid. Otherwise known as mass displacement. Immediately after Aoko dodged the puppet's arm, something smashed into her abdomen. The head-on collision from its shoulder felt like a rocket. But where had the ability to propel itself come from? Puppets like this were not built to have the ability to jet around like that. The arm, silly. Doing everything in her power to stay conscious in spite of the pain. Aoko could just make out what had happened. Bingo, that's the ticket. Yes, the puppet's arm had not returned to its body. It was lodged in the wall, and reeled itself in from the other direction. Which, As someone who has fought in a ring, boxing and kickboxing, and I've done jiu-jitsu, I cannot imagine how much that would hurt to just get sucker shoulder tackled like that. Even taking the puppet's weight on the light side, let's just give it like 100 pounds. That, like, 100 pounds at full tilt sprint, smashing into your abdomen, into your tummy, that would not be a good time. She's got to be reeling. Swallowing her surprise, she hastily pulled herself back up. Her abdomen, specifically her diaphragm, had been dealt a significant blow. The attack left her disoriented. Thankfully, the puppet was surprisingly lightweight. Her bones and organs were intact, and she had sustained no life-threatening damage. She was having a hard time breathing, however. She was shaken, though she managed to keep her calm. In another 2 seconds, she'd be back on her feet. No, that was 2 seconds too long. She told herself to calm down, that she was already calm. She'd only briefly lost her bearings. She was fine. She could recover her breath and her vision later if only her body would move. Intellectus non necessarius est, pius quaescat. O nostra essentia blata fuit, retio fixa tantum est, dolores initium cerebrum fuit. Above her, Aoko could hear the warped noise of a powerful force. She could once more feel the touch of death. Li salvatio. The puppet was so close that Aoko could reach out and touch it. That also meant that he could reach out and touch Aoko. By intuition alone, Aoko rolled over to the puppet's right flank. Its arm was still embedded within the wall. From here it could not attack. She had made the right decision and her dizziness faded. Cast off righteousness, lay piety to rest. We beasts are meant to consume each other. Life is but a decoration. Throw away your intellect. Pain powers the mind. Aoko pulled herself back up. It was her turn. We're the same, you and I. It was only an instant. Within this labyrinth of mirrors, she saw an image of herself. Li salvatio. A blinding, brilliant light flashed. Lacerations appeared across the walls. At the last moment, Aoko managed to thicken the magical energy running through her veins into a primitive form of magecraft resistance. It just barely saved her life from what must have been the puppet's ace in the hole. The puppet bore a striking resemblance to Aoko. This powerful curse was not satisfied with stopping Aoko's heart, but destroying her entire being. Aoko did not even have the time to be shocked. This was her chance for a counterattack. The puppet's balance was unsteady, its right arm still embedded in the wall. Aoko prepared to give its defenseless body a strong kick, but her knees buckled and she collapsed into a heap on the floor. Vivo in somno, solitarie petrusco in inferis, hic dies meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies te obio. I swear, if I summon a demon in my room from reading this Latin in this game, I'm going to be very upset. A sudden nausea and lightheadedness overcame Aoko. Her body temperature began to rapidly lower. It's just walking AoE, man. She noticed too late. The puppet's curses circulated the hall. The cursed chant that the puppet used as a source of power doubled as a defense mechanism, crippling those who drew near with illness. Her strength turned into weakness. She bore the full brunt the entire time she was in close proximity to it. Although Aoko had magic circuits, she was succumbing just as Soujurou had. Languidly, she forced her deteriorating body to jump back. With all the same energy she could muster, she forced her way past exhaustion caused by the curse. However, Aoko's blood pressure took a steep nosedive, not from the curse-induced anemia, but from what appeared in front of her. They stood in perfect harmony. In front of Aoko was the automata that shared her face, its left arm held out like an arrow. The deadly weapon shot forward and honed in on her heart. Then, a moment before it made contact. You know it's our boy. The moment she heard that fearless voice, completely out of place in this storm of violence, Aoko's body was pulled forcefully to one side. Once again, the extending arm cut through empty air. While the puppet quickly retracted its left arm, Soujurou took the brief opportunity to take Aoko by the hand and flee at full speed. Soujurou ran through the corridor as fast as he could, only stopping when he put enough distance between them and the puppet.
考えてみると
Dangerous hobby. Though he had saved her, she looked angry rather than grateful. This did not keep Soujurou from saying his piece. Good for you,
明
bud.
日はどうも忙しいみたいなんだ
In other words, let's finish this today. A rather awkward proposal, but a proposal nonetheless. Aoko remained silent. She was also rather angry. Not that she could not figure out what made him tick, or because he'd returned after escaping. Not even because he was spouting his typical airheaded lines. It was, she supposed, that instant. The fact that when he grabbed her hand, her mind had gone completely blank. Aoko found it unforgivable. Which beckoned the response.
あなた正気
In the heat of the moment, she blurted it out before she could stop herself.
それとも自殺願望でもあったわけ私もあいつもあんたなんか殺す対象に過ぎないのよ少なくとも恩を売る相手じゃない言っとくけど私助けられたぐらいで曲がる信念は持ち合わせていないから
Harsh, but not entirely untrue. Soujurou nodded, clearly unperturbed.
青崎がそんな可愛らしいもんじゃないのはこの夜だけで骨身に染みてるよ
She found herself slightly offended.
けど君は勘違いをしてるから少し正そうあいつの狙いは青崎だけじゃない君だけじゃなく俺も殺す気だと思う
She was having none of it. Her eyes shot daggers his way.
話は最後まで聞くどうしてかっていうと1階の入り口あるだろあの細長い通路なんでかあそこから先に進めないんだ逃げたくても逃げ出せなくて仕方なく戻ってきた
Seems the automaton is smarter than it lets on, trapping its prey in there. Aoko's eyes widened ever so slightly in amazement. She felt admiration rather than shock that her enemy would go to such lengths.
それにさっきので完全に敵扱いされたあの人形
Well,
こっちをじろっと睨んできた
like
し
Aoko, like automaton, I suppose. Neither of them seemed particularly fond of Aoko.
いや
Poor guy.
一瞬でよく見えなかったけど生きた心地しなかったな青崎も気をつけた方がいい多分よっぽど怖い顔
And
をしている
we
に
have
違い
a
ない
little
ぞ
bit of a return of open mouth insert foot.
それはご親切にどうも
なんでこれはもう他人事じゃないんだ。青崎と人形、結論としてどっちが勝っても俺は殺されてしまうんじゃないか。
そうね。そこまでやってるなら目撃者は消すでしょうね。私みたいに。
だろ。でも俺はあいつには殺されたくない。
え
？His words were decisive. As Aoko looked up at him, she could swear he was trying to encourage her. It was then that she realized Soujurou was looking even worse than before.
ちょっと待って。大丈夫なのあなた。
まあ醤油を一升瓶飲むよりはマシではないかと。
Somehow I feel like he's probably drunk an entire bottle of soy sauce. He tried to make light of the situation, but his forehead was clearly drenched in
そう
sweat.
か。さっき人形に近づいたから。
How could he possibly be able to withstand a curse that made even Aoko nauseous? She bit her lip, annoyed at herself for not noticing this earlier. Soujurou was such an airhead that she hadn't even paused to consider his plight.
下で隠れていようとか思わなかったの？その
She really could not understand him at all.
それは青崎が言うセリフじゃないな。でもまあ長話をしている時間もない。そろそろ追いついてくる頃だ。
He turned to look down the corridor. The crackling sounds of a music box could be heard creeping forth from the darkness.
さっき1階にて考えたんだ。君がやられても俺は殺される。ならまず奴をどうにかするべきだ。
Ooh. Is there a deal to be struck here?
あなた何が言いたいの？
She asked a question to which she already knew the answer. She did it to put him to the test. If he wavered even a little, she would have killed him where he stood.
提案。あいつをやっつけるのに協力したら俺のことを見逃してくれる？
助けられたぐらいじゃ信念は曲げないって言ったでしょ。それにあなたに何ができるっていうの？
それは青崎が考えてくれ。得意だろそういうの。
A shrewd businessman. The commander, who had the overall picture, was responsible for delegating roles to their teammates. It was futile to depend on someone who was unable to grasp the situation or evaluate the enemy's strength. Soujurou was proud to share that he knew this. He's clever when he wants to be. He spoke the truth. Aoko was the only one who knew both Soujurou and the automata. That was why he pointed out that following her orders to the best of his ability was the only thing he could do. It may have seemed as though Soujurou had surrendered his capacity for self-thought, but in accepting that he was helpless, he was in fact giving Aoko his complete trust.
じゃあ私の指示に 100% 従うってこと？
ああ。それにこれは恩とか義理の話じゃない。一人だと分が悪いから二人でかかるだけだ。善意でも好意でもない。取引って言わないかこういうの。
There are worse things than that in life. Transactional bargain. His eyes sparkled, as if this was bartering in its truest form. Oh, he's got the itch. He's got some business in him. This child must have learned that from Toby Maru, Aoko thought. Though she refused to let him see it, she smiled inwardly. Sure, he'd gotten the best of her just now, but there were times when defeat was not the worst outcome in the world.
労働と報酬ってわけね。それなら理にかなってる。うん。言いたくないけど。
She relaxed her shoulders and sighed. Her face cracked into a wicked grin, as if her fears had suddenly washed away.
それ結構私の好みよ。
Aoko repaid Soujurou's trust in equal measure, the only way to do so.
結構きついかもね。 あなたの役目。
Aoko warned Soujurou, moving fast as she could without her footfalls causing a din of noise. Soujurou remained near the center of the spiral maze on the second floor.
実を言うと、もう一つ用意しておいた仕掛けがあるの。
Of
自
course
分
she
でも
did.
やりすぎだって呆れたもんだけど、あなたがここに来るのが遅かったから、ちょっと興に乗っちゃって。
仕掛けって俺用の？
Soujurou tilted his head like a squirrel as Aoko freely discussed the final lace up her sleeve. Oh, we have a
地
nice
下の
little
柱
diagram.
に着火型のちょっとした魔術式を刻んでおいたの。中心の柱に点火することでジャミングを食らう前に作ったものだから、直接魔力を叩き込めば一気にこういくわ。
This girl just planted C4 in the whole place. That's what this boils down to. I can appreciate it, but come on. Soujurou was a little unsettled by how unclear that last bit was.
青崎、こうじゃわからない。できるだけ明確にどこまで爆破する気だったのか白状してくれ。あと、もしかして俺謝ったか？
Too late to back up now.
いや、その単なる保険っていうか、
Insurance policy, she says.
追いかけっこの途中であんたを見失ったら、いっそ建物ごと爆破しちゃおうかなって。
Such an Aoko plan. It was her policy to be thorough to a fault, after all. She laughed, embarrassed to hear her say it out loud.
いくらなんでも徹底しすぎてる。
Faced with Aoko's cruelty, Soujurou forgot about the situation at hand and protested from the bottom of his heart. Can't blame him.
何よ、いいじゃない。そのおかげでなんとかなりそうなんだから。
She shot back. Aoko dashed down the corridor, mumbling things that probably would have sent Soujurou packing if he heard them. Strategy was simple. Aoko would use the escape route to the right and avoid the puppet, while making her way down to the basement. Upon reaching the central pillar, she would infuse the formula she had prepared with magical energy and escape. Once ignited, it would take about a minute for the chain reaction to spread throughout the whole House of Mirrors, and another minute for the building to collapse. 2 minutes. She'd be cutting it a little close, but because she had committed the maze to memory, she was sure she could make it out in time. Aoko assumed that the chain reaction caused by the pillar would clear the barrier that the puppet had placed at the entrance. And even if it was strong enough to withstand the blast, it would not be able to stay standing once the foundations buckled. Soujurou's escape was assured as long as the formula in the basement was activated. Next came the most important part. The automaton was at a disadvantage in the obstacle-laden House of Mirrors, and it was unable to move at full speed. If it was near the center of the second floor when the building collapsed, it would be caught up and crushed by it. So the problem was keeping the puppet on the second floor until Aoko could make it down to the basement.
当てにしたからね、しずきくん。せめて3分ぐらいは引きつけて。
3 minutes. 3 minutes and it'll work. Ideally, he would be able to keep it busy until she could activate the formula. If that failed to work, him lowering it down to the first floor would be the next best thing. She understood perfectly well the danger she was putting Soujurou in, but his lucky streak and running speed were nothing to scoff at.
ただ逃げるだけなら、もしかしてとんでもないことをしてくれるかも、あいつ。
Aoko made her way through the hidden passage of the maze, her hopes pinned on Soujurou. Meanwhile, well out of earshot, Soujurou was readying himself against another desperate chase. He calmed his beating heart using a method of his own making. What mattered most was that he remained calm. The plan was simple enough. Naoko's orders were succinct and easy to understand.
10メートルぐらいの距離を保って、できるだけゆっくり通路を3、4周すること。横道は鏡のつなぎ目で覚えて。ここなら左回りで6、3、7、2枚目にあるから、 そこをぐるぐる回ってれば比較的安全。
It was essentially a looping marathon, run in circles. As long as Soujurou kept just enough distance from the puppet's extending arm to allow her to track him, she could continue to chase him indefinitely. Simple though the task was, Soujurou was putting his life on the line as bait. And then there was the final order to run as fast as he could to the exit when the building was began to sway.
結構じゃなくてかなりきついんじゃないかなこれは。
Too late for doubt. You signed up for this now, bud. He nervously stuck his head out from around the corner. He could hear the sound of the music box from the other side of the corridor. First, he had to make eye contact with it, then head through the shortcut on the right and begin their game of tag. He spotted it and braced himself. Closer. Closer. Fearing that her arm could fly at him at any moment, he went over Aoko's instructions in her head. In his head. Mate. However, he could not quite remember which pane led to the first hidden passage. The third? The sixth? The ninth? Oh boy. No. He was sure that was mistaken. He was confident he had memorized it moments ago, but his nerves had gotten the best of him, and his head was now spinning. Then, Soujurou realized that the sound of his pursuer was beginning to grow distant, and at an incredible speed. Oh, I like that, not at all. The unusual silhouette of the puppet astonished him. Before it had taken the form of a beautiful girl. But now it made a bizarre transformation, and returned to the first floor to pursue its primary target.
いやそれは
Ah, you know, best laid plans and all that. Soujurou was no longer quite sure what to do. Before he'd even had time to mourn his failure, the puppet had vanished out of sight. Or so he had said, but now he couldn't follow through. So much for the helping bit.
さて自分はこれからどうしよう。
Alone, he tilted his head in frustration. He spoke into the darkness as if Aoko would be there to answer him. Meanwhile, downstairs, as soon as she arrived on the first floor, Aoko understood what had transpired above her. She did not even have to strain her ears to hear the puppet. Even during its heyday, this attraction had never made sounds like the one she heard coming towards her now. It was the sound of despair, as if a horde of monstrous hedgehogs were scraping their way past the mirrors in her direction. Cold steel the heg coming at you strong.
ドジ3分どころか10秒持たないってどういうことよ。
Rather than buying her time, Soujurou had instead stolen hers. He had one job, to run away, that was all. She cursed him under her breath. Enough of those going on today.
ってことは二足から多脚に切り替えたのね。
The echoes made it sound like dozens of feet were approaching. Aoko's mind conjured the image of a giant, six-legged spider, tearing its way down the corridor. It was little wonder that it was so much faster than before. Terrifying mental image. Its perception of its surroundings through echolocation was of particular use in the dark. Compared to sight-dependent humans, this automaton was far better equipped to navigate its way through the labyrinth of mirrors. If it could not keep pace earlier, that had been because its bipedal mode had been less maneuverable. Now, the stability provided by multiple legs gave it a speed that far exceeded that of any human.
どうする
Her thoughts spun out as she tried to come up with a plan B. All she knew for sure was that this was a pivotal moment. If she continued standing still, she had seconds left at most. Even in her current state, she knew she could easily neutralize the bounded field blocking the entrance without casting a spell. All she had to do was feed a little bit of her own energy into it. Aoko could sprint with all her might for a little more than 3 minutes. The puppet had far more stamina than she did. she could only come up with 3 options. The first was to escape through the exit in front of her. The second was to hide somewhere on the more complicated first floor. And the third was to run into the basement and be stuck like a rat in a box.
なんだ考える
Well,
までもない
that's obvious enough. She made her decision with 0 hesitation. Moving her stiff legs again with determined strength. The oncoming storm was almost upon her. Her resolve firm, she turned and ran, descending into the darkness. No matter what, a finale should be glorious. This would be the Mirror Castle's final scene. 2 humans and a puppet. A young sorceress ran toward the subterranean heart of the castle, while an autonomous antique chased its prey into the depths of a demonic dungeon. A minute later, a flame blue charge would ripple through the castle. This was the main pillar in the deepest depths of the basement. Though not critical to the castle's structure, the pillar was a visible symbol of it. The girl concentrated her magic and energy into a fist and thrust it into the pillar. This was the blow that would bring down the castle. She imagined the destruction as she threw the punch, and that scene blossomed into reality seconds later. It was simple ignition magecraft, meant to release the condensed magical energy engraved into the 4 pillars at the corners of the structure. Using electricity as a switch meant virtually instantaneous activation. Uh-oh. Overkill indeed. It happened swiftly and oh so elegantly. A hammer of destruction descended upon the castle of dreams that had stubbornly resisted its fate for 2 years. It was almost a joyous sound. And so, the lifeless and abandoned Castle of Mirrors set the stage for its final and most spectacular performance. Aoko's magical energy became an electrical discharge that activated the magical formula engraved into the pillar. The chain reaction would lead to the castle's destruction.
ご苦労様でも思ってたよりくたびれてたのねこれじゃ1分持つかどうか
The plaza in the center of the basement. Aoko tried to steady her breathing whilst rotating her magic crest at full speed. She wreathed her arms in blue light, fully aware that she could no longer activate another formula. Something wicked this way comes. Her labored breathing refused to settle. She stood at the center of the basement. Without being spotted even once, she had managed to make it all the way to the central pillar. It was a 100-meter dash in 13 seconds flat. Undoubtedly a new personal best. She spurred on her weakened heart, knowing full well the fate that awaited her.
入れば追ってくる地下に行けば逃げられない当然よね最後まで逃げ回ろうなんて虫のいい話だった
Hindsight was 2020. The castle was only a minute away from collapsing completely. If they stayed here, they would both be crushed by the rubble. The puppet certainly didn't care. With no life of its own, its sole concern was the elimination of its target, Aoko Iwasaki. Indeed. The enemy had been willing to die from the start. She resented her own lack of resolve. It wasn't like her to tuck tail and run from an opponent that didn't fear death.
Vivo insomni, solitare putoresque inferis. Ictius meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies. Te obeam.
Vivo in somno, solitarie putresco in inferis. Hic dies meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies. Te obeam.
そもそも自爆覚悟じゃないあれ 6足歩行とフィンの一撃は使いすぎよ。もう呪詛による魔力補給じゃ間に合わない。
Such a perpetual motion device was only as good as its ability to regulate its energy consumption. Using so many functions at once meant it was burning through fuel quickly, losing the ability to process the curses that powered it. It was using up all the functions it had been given to achieve its aim. This was the pride of a tool, if such things could even have an ego. Those endowed with sentience could never hope to understand. A beast born to do nothing but run would burn any human who faced its resolve.
ほんともったいない。こういう無茶をするのは姉貴だけかと思ってたけど、いるところにはいるもんね。
But Aoko did not intend to sacrifice play here. She respected her adversary now, and she was done regretting her choices. There was no time to waste.
行くわよ。ここできっかり。
She moving. Aoko had every intention of paying it back double for what it had done to her. The energy Aoko had accumulated exploded out of her right leg. She aimed for a single thing, a head-on attack. The enemy responded with a lethal curse that reached for her heart like a set of talons. Humming with power, it meant to rend Aoko's heart and burn itself out in the process. As soon as she saw it, Aoko kicked the floor as hard as she could. Her long hair swirled through the air as she flipped aside. This lateral move almost sent her tumbling to the ground, but a quick swing of her arm allowed her to regain her balance. A shot grazed her arm, the curse scorching her left shoulder. She did not flinch. Aoko knew she could hold on as long as she continued to avoid a direct fin shot. Off balance and in pain, it took her half a second to recover. The moment she raised her head, she deflected the attack with a fistful of magical energy. If the puppet had a will of its own, its eyes would have popped right out of its sockets. It would have been floored, shocked at the strong will that allowed this girl to perform a series of moves like this. Aoko's response was instantaneous. While her power was not sufficient to completely redirect the arm's trajectory, it was just enough to deflect it harmlessly past her hair. It was all a mistake. I should have never been born. Atone for me. Atone for me. Atone for me. The chant became a curse that robbed Aoko of her vitality. Did it still have something left in the tank? Or was it actually indignant? Whatever the reason, Aoko was easily able to resist its weakened defensive maneuver. Big kick. And her right leg, pulsing with magical energy, shot up into the puppet's chest from below. It was much lighter than Aoko had anticipated. Or rather, she felt little resistance. An automaton's weight was determined by its internals, the size of its power source. Ironically, it was the superiority of its music box engine that would prove to be its downfall.
Venite, venite, venite. Meum sepulchrum, venite.
Venite, venite, venite. Meum sepulchrum venite. A stuttering curse. Having taken the full brunt of Aoko's kick, the puppet bounced from ceiling to floor, collapsing in a heap. Its internal construction had been warped by the impact, leaving the drum of the music box that powered the puppet warped as well.
恨むなら設計者を恨みなさい。ダイナモの一つでも積んでいれば もうちょっとは重たくなったでして。
Uh-oh. You better move. Part of the ceiling came crashing down in front of Aoko, snapping her back to her senses. You're not out of this yet.
どうやってぶっ倒したんだ。
She was so stunned by her own victory that she forgot the House of Mirrors had already begun to collapse.
こっちの方がやばかった。
There was no time to relish in her victory or pity her opponent. Not unless she wanted to meet the same fate. As the situation stood, she found it hard to imagine getting out alive.
急げ、ダッシュだ私。
She clapped herself on the cheeks to motivate herself anew. This was her bounty for finishing their battle in a matter of seconds. Her breath ragged with excitement, Aoko ran for the exit. The collapse was intensifying by the second. Having lost its support pillars, the castle was buckling under its own weight.
この邪魔。
No way out, just through. Escaping from the basement was proving to be no easy task. While she was taking the shortest route possible through the maze, she was nearly crushed by a falling piece of ceiling along the way. This was the second time, no third, she had to deal with fallen rubble along the way. Time. She destroyed the debris on the stairs with magic bullets as she ran. The automaton's jamming had long since worn off. The earlier attack had damaged the vast majority of its functions. Kaboom. Aoko's breathing was heavy as she ran. Desperation sparked her brain into overdrive. The ceiling seemed to be collapsing in slow motion. Life seemed to flash before her very eyes. Each second stretched into 5. Her frayed nerves made it hard to tell the time. This is a phenomenon that's actually real. We like to call it fight time. There was debris riddled throughout the stairway, forcing her to crawl up it. She emerged from the destroyed basement into the collapsing first floor. That the plaza was still traversable at all was a miracle in itself, and fortunately for her, the crucial path to the exit was still intact.
よし、ついてる。
The corridor to the entrance was still intact. The basement maze only extended as far as the plaza, so the entrance corridor wouldn't collapse. Only the ceiling would cave in, leaving the scaffolding surround intact. She got herself this far by telling herself repeatedly that fate would decide whether or not she reached the plaza. Her gamble had paid off. It was her lucky day. All she had to do was muster the last for strength and keep moving forward until... She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Was it naivety? A sense of responsibility? She pushed aside the image that popped into her head and continued running down the corridor.
言っとくけど、
Don't have
時
time
間合
for
わせ
that.
の余裕はないわよ。そんな上等な作戦じゃないし、お互いできることをやったら最速で出口に向かいましょう。
That was 5 minutes ago. I remind everybody, the original plan was 3 minutes. At the time, Soujurou had nodded with trepidation, and Aoko had not bothered to ask herself why.
何様だっての私、今は走ることだけ考えろ。
This corridor was giving out too. If she were to look back, she was sure she would see the building collapsing in on her. She was also sure she had no time to waste doing so. Her luck was fading as fast as the building's structural integrity. It was a small miracle that she had escaped serious injury up to this point, and she could not afford to even get the slightest slip-up. An ankle sprain, loss of balance, even a sneeze would be fatal. A simple pat on the back was enough to end it. So naturally... a problem. Thing just doesn't want to die. There it was, clear as day. From the detritus of the stairway, death had arisen to take her down with it. A corpse that had crawled its way up from the depths of hell itself. It was still operational. and it was still armed with curses. It had crawled after her, watching as Aoko desperately tried to save herself. The puppet's arm shot forward. While Aoko did not turn to meet it, she could see its reflection in the mirrors. Extend, extend, extend. This time she could not dodge it. There was absolutely nothing else she could do. The puppet with her face sang, I invite you to die a muddy death. Become as whispering dust. Gouge out your heart. Death be upon you. For a moment, she could not believe her eyes. It was the last thing she'd expected to see. A fierce expression adorned the face of the boy who had been waiting in the plaza as he smashed the puppet's outstretched arm. Anger really didn't suit him at all. His weapon of choice was a fire extinguisher. He must have searched the maze for something to use as a weapon. No, never mind that. It was too crazy to contemplate. But had he stayed behind? For her? Aoko stopped the feet she had sworn would never stop moving and extended a hand out to him. Soujurou tossed the fire extinguisher aside and took off running. Pieces of the ceiling continued to collapse like dominoes. They kept moving with dust and dirt following in their wake. Their shadows raced through the collapsing corridor with all their strength. The castle was in the throes of death. With a massive crash and a cloud of dust, the final chapter on the fairy tale that had been Kitsyland came to an abrupt end. This duel to the death was over. Solidarity. The ringing in their ears subsided before long. A tremor of such magnitude seemed impossible in an amusement park like this. As the sounds of destruction echoed across the park, Aoko addressed the individual at her side. While the click of her tongue was adorable, the meaning behind it was anything but.
Aozaki, あいつどうなった?
見ての通りよ。今頃バラバラ死体になってるんじゃない?
Soujurou sighed, not wholly relieved by her frank response. His reason.
でも、そんな心配より自分の心配をした方がいいと思うわよ。
She still wants to murder him. He wasn't out of the woods yet, after all.
青崎、子供の頃はいじめっ子だっただろ。
可逆趣味がないって自負してるけど。それで、今の自分の立場、分かってる?
That damn smile. She sat up and smiled. Soujurou hung his head in shame, wondering why her kind tone and expression were so chilling.
面目次第もございません。
かしこまってもダメよ。あの提案には大前提があったわよね。これは取引だって。
分かってる。だから面目ないって言ってるだろ。
Soujurou made a show of avoiding her eyes, like a pouting child. Aoko was taken aback by this sulky display. Perhaps he was angry at himself rather than her? He was not mad because she would not let him go. He was mad that he had not done his part. Honest to a fault, our dear boy. Aoko sighed for what seemed like the millionth time that day. She could not figure out what surprised her more, his unconditional kindness or her naive approval of it.
じゃあ、覚悟はできてるの?
そんなのはできないけど、約束だからな。結局は何もしていないし。
It was certainly the case that he had failed to do any of the things she had expected of him. But just then, she glanced back at the collapsed house of mirrors. What had he done after failing so spectacularly? Had he searched for the extinguisher so she could use it as a weapon? And waited patiently in the plaza as the maze collapsed all around him, just because he thought it was wrong to leave her behind? It was a foolish choice, and the exact opposite of her choice to run towards the exit without hesitation.
ま、それでよしとするか。
She was satisfied, even as she was shocked at how naive she was being. It was true, he had saved her. She smiled inwardly, admired, if only for a moment, the bravery he continued to show in the face of such extreme circumstances.
役割は果たさなかったけど、アフターケアは合格だし、約束は守らなくちゃね。
With a nod, she pulled herself to her feet.
約束は、ま、いつか守ってもらうとして。
No such thing as a free lunch with her, huh? The girl tried to keep a straight face as she offered a hand to the boy still lying on the
結果は
ground.
どうあれ手助けしてもらったし、特別サービスってことで、今夜はもう手を出さないであげる。
A night's reprieve. Hey, better than nothing, I suppose. She bashfully averted her gaze. Though her profile appeared different than it had in the past, it was clearly still the face of a vibrant girl he met that day he first arrived in town.
何？
As if she had felt his eyes on her, she shot him a frowning glare.
いや、突拍子もないけど、青崎は律儀だなって。
He took her outstretched hand. Feeling his weight as she pulled him up, she could not help but think that he was about the last person she wanted to hear that from.
ところで、今夜はって言うけど、明日からは。
さあ、ま、その時になったら考えるわ。
Good luck, Soujurou-kun. She shrugged her shoulders as she was not sure herself. The response was so unlike her that it made Soujurou smile. Was it the solidarity of having escaped death together, or their fleeting camaraderie that made him do so? It might have been for this night only, but the air between them was kind and gentle. A lot had transpired, but the midwinter nightmare had come to an end. The pair had overcome many trials and tribulations, and could now leave the mirror realm in their wake. But before that,
随分と見
before
張って
that,
ね。
aren't you forgetting
そ
somebody?
れはあなた一人で決めていいことだったかしら、青子。
There's another mage that we forgot about in the midst of all this, isn't there? Not just a mage, a witch, of terrifying and grand and arcane power. It was the voice of a beautiful songbird and a merciless machine, all rolled into one.
アリス。
Her voice quivered as she spoke the name. And that, ladies and gentlemen, after a death dodged. After a couple of deaths dodged, actually. But I hope you enjoyed our little story. And I hope you'll join me again as we continue the story at a later date. Probably later this week. If not, then early tomorrow. Or not tomorrow, excuse me. Early next week. And I hope you guys have enjoyed very much our time together. I certainly have. A very good time and a very, very good way to cap off my Monday, which has been very busy. And I hope it was a good way to relax and cap off your Monday as well. Until next time, guys, I wish you guys all the best, and I thank you very much for being here. And I'll catch you next time. Peace.